very much, Helmut, for that kind introduction, and I wish to thank first of all the LCC for giving me this opportunity and for their achievement in setting up a research culture that is inspiring, critically constructive and collegiate. It is a real privilege to be thinking, reading and writing in such a stimulating environment, and I look forward to many more discussions with graduate students and fellows in the months to come as I continue to work on my RCC project. Today's talk forms part of my current monograph, The Wooded Isle, the Construction of an Irish Ecological Imagination. Ireland, the Wooded Isle. You might find this puzzling. When you close your eyes and think of Ireland, you are perhaps imagining dramatic coastlines, sweeping vistas of pasture lands for sheep grazing, peat bogs, or the vast rocky limestones in County Clare. You're unlikely to imagine a densely wooded island. Yet, in the vernacular, Ireland was known as the Woody Isle, and the Ogham alphabet of the early medieval period was strongly connected to the island's native trees. Thus, it is known as the tree alphabet. This points to complex entanglements of nature, culture, and language. In my project, I identify a discourse on trees and woods in Irish writing from the 16th to the 20th centuries. As Francis Ludlow and Arlene Crampais remark, while the extent of Irish woodlands at the start of the 16th century is debated, as is the status of these woodlands as ancient or recent growth forests, it seems likely that one of the most dramatic environmental changes in the period between 1550 and 1730 was the ultimate widespread deforestation of the Irish landscape. The tentative statement that it seems likely points to the fact that there's not the history of Irish woods, but rather multiple histories. In 1915, an article on Irish domains and Irish gardening gestures towards one particular yet unwritten history of Irish woods. One branch of our modern history, the article reads, is already so forgotten or overlooked that its story is little likely ever to be written, and for this I am sorry, for it is the story of the great planting revolution, bloodless and non-political, which, beginning in the latter half of the 18th century and lasting up to, say, 1830 or 1840, gave employment to tens of thousands of Irishmen at home, and which reclassed her hills and valleys with some, at any rate, of the woods which centuries of war and waste had swept almost utterly away. Of course, it was at the same time that the great majority of our country houses were built. How might we be able to tell this particular history that is pointed out here? Is it as non-political as the author suggests? And I would argue that Irish literature offers a critical source for just such an investigation. So I want to offer you one particular case study from my project that indicates how that history could be written. So let me introduce you to a particular tree. Here you see a 1927 photograph of an imposing catalpa tree. It stands in the grounds of Coole Domain in County Galway in the west of Ireland. The tree was most likely planted in the latter half of the 18th century, when the Irish-born politician Robert Gregory returned from his service in the East India Company and acquired that estate. Catalpa trees originate from North America, the Caribbean, and East Asia, so it's a non-native tree. Although I don't know the specifics as to how this particular tree took root in the soil at Coole, it is likely that it travelled all the way to Galway via imperial networks. Underneath the catalpa tree sits Lady Augusta Gregory, one of the most important Irish female playwrights and co-founder of the Abbey Theatre, Ireland's national theatre. She had married into the Gregory family in 1880 and entered early widowhood at the age of 40 in 1892. As a custodian of the family's estate for her son Robert, she understood environmental stewardship as an integral part of estate management, spending both time and a significant portion of her income on the upkeep of Coole's woodland. In her journals, the regular activity of planting saplings of ash, beech, birch, larch, lime, oak, spruce, sycamore and yew are matched by her exchanges with the social, political and cultural elite of the country. When, in the summer of 1897, the neighbouring landlord and writer Edward Martin of Tulera Castle, County Galway, visited her with his guest, the young poet William Butler Yeats, she soon became the patron of the Irish literary revival, with Coole as its headquarters. Gregory started to extend invitations to her contemporaries on the Irish cultural and literary scene to carve their initials into the bark of yet another magnificent tree in the grounds of Coole, the copper beech tree that you see here. The first to inscribe their names, we can assume, were her son Robert, the president of the Gaelic League, Douglas Hyde, the painter and writer George Russell, W.B. Yeats, and Augusta herself. This sacred tree of Coole, as playwright Sean O'Casey describes it, stands as a monument to her legacy. This practice of laying claim to the landscape was based on exclusivity and by invitation only. Rather reproachfully, Gregory noted later, but alas, once or twice, country lads doing some work in the orchard, seeing these signatures, thought it natural to add their own, and these unknown to literature may puzzle some future antiquarian. In her article, Tree Planting, such cultural conceptualization of the arboreal world is wedded to its material reality. If woods like friendships are not kept in constant repair, she warned her readers, that day will come when they will be but a memory. Gregory recalled that Ireland, more than other countries, ought to be a country of trees, for the very letters of her alphabet are named after them. She was explicitly gesturing toward the language movement and musing, perhaps with the revival of her old language, they will be better called to mind. Appearing in the pages of the Irish Homestead, a weekly paper associated with the Irish Agricultural Organisation Society, Gregory proposed in her article that reafforestation and language revival went hand in hand. Through her article, she assisted the self-help movement by sharing her knowledge of silviculture and thoughts on the present and future state of Irish forestry. On the one hand, she connects reafforestation to the cultural revival at large, and on the other hand, she makes it clear that we can't all have woods. In her argument, she's establishing the link between private property and environmental activism. In doing so, she argued for the continued necessity and importance of the landed Anglo-Irish class in Irish society that had its roots in the country's colonial history. And you see the quotation here, which I find quite striking and emotive, where she talks about her personal relationship to that particular landscape. We find the little seedlings we had put down in faith are over our heads and acting as our protectors. And she's talking about them as lasting monuments that we had planted, that we had loved. Tree planting, the article I'm referring to there, puts forward one form of knowledge on tree planting, that of an amateur female planter who firmly places herself within the family tradition of tree planters. Trees emerge as central to Irish politics, land and literature. Gregory concerns herself as much with the real as with the cultural. And Coole's woods were predominantly estate plantations that had their roots in the 18th century. And the we she refers to embeds that kind of elite from the 18th century. And the Gregory family had a long-standing interest in landscape design, agricultural improvement, and forestry, and the holdings in the library give testimony to this. So there were copies, for instance, of Richard Payne Knight's The Landscape, Humphrey Repton's work on landscape gardening, Claudius Loudon's Quintessential and Encyclopedia of Gardening. And in addition, there was William Ponty's Forest Pruner, along with various volumes of the Board of Agriculture on subjects relating to husbandry and improvement, and the complete first series of the Transactions from the Horticultural Society of London. So that kind of shows you the intellectual environment that she had access to on a regular basis, and also the practice that she'd acquired whilst living on the estate with her husband. And the idea of trees or the woodlands of the estate as a monument is important. And so here's just an estate map from the early 1920s as well, showing you where we are. So Coole House is somewhere there with the walled garden, and you can see the plantations kind of around there. Gregory situates her argument within a wider national framework, and she articulates a commitment to sustainable woodland management. She recounted that when her son Robert cut down a tree as a young boy, she promptly told him that he must never cut one down without planting two in its place. Gregory thus raised her son to be aware of the responsibilities of environmental stewardship and for the continuance of family legacies. She called for a nationwide revolution of tree planting that would unite the oppositional groups of those who supported Ireland's constitutional status as per the Act of Union of 1800 and those who campaigned for either Home Rule or separation. In the very year in which Irish nationalists were marking the centenary of their most noteworthy attempt at staging a rebellion against British rule, she overtly expressed her wish that every nationalist would plant at least one tree in this year of 98, and every unionist in 1900, and every waverer or indifferent person in the year that separates them. For Gregory, then, the environment and ecological consciousness had the power to sidestep political divisions. There's the quote. Sorry for that. And there you see an aerial shot of the estate there. The literature of the Irish literary revival that Gregory was so closely embedded in offered a different form of knowledge on Coole's woodlands. And here we're talking about the kind of cultural mythologization of the landscape that was put forward predominantly in Yeats's poetry. Yeats spent many, many summers at Coole writing many of his plays and poetry, and he was influenced by this particular arboreal landscape. And he pays tribute in his work to his patron and to the woods surrounding the domain. But nowhere have the Coole woods been described as an enchanted and mythical place more poignantly than in Yeats's The Shadowy Waters, a play from 1900. The play is dedicated to Lady Gregory, and it opens with a poem that evokes the mythical woods of Coole. 3 years later, he published his volume of poetry in the Seven Woods, being poems chiefly of the Irish heroic age, contributing further to the mythologization of place. Tree planting at Coole was thus not only a practical matter, but also a different collaborative enterprise. In her biography of the house, entitled Coole, Lady Gregory includes a subchapter on its woods. Here she acknowledged that she had not managed the woods on her own. Quote, "My companion and best helper, an old man, now passed away. Many a time in winter snow we have gone out together with tar and brush to mark the bark distasteful to hungry rabbits, or in summertime he with slasher, I with spud, to free our nurslings from the choking of brambles or of grass. He was an old master of the business, had loved it through his lifetime." The old man was Gregory's woodcutter, John Farrell. Having worked on the Coole estate for Gregory's husband, Farrell was intimately acquainted with the domain's woods. He was listed as a farm servant on the census for 1901, aged 79 at that time. In addition to looking after Coole's woods, Farrell also contributed to their mythologization. He offered up folklore to both Lady Gregory and Yeats, being, as he was, witness to, quote, an unearthly sight in the woods. This vision occurred to him while cutting timber in Inchy Wood at Coole, which is in the south part of the domain. Old Farrell then offers a different production of knowledge about the woods, one that is not scientific, but rather cultural and connected to folklore and oral culture. He channeled both the natural and supernatural of the arboreal environment. And his stories were subsequently included in Yeats and Gregory's publications, including an essay on the enchanted woods and Gregory's visions and beliefs in the west of Ireland. But despite his practical and literary service to woodland management at Coole and to the Irish literary revival through his folklore of the Seven Woods, his name is not inscribed in the bog of the autograph tree, nor is any tree planted in his memory. By the 1920s, Gregory was no longer able to afford the upkeep of house and woods, but at that point it was really a popular place, and people both within Ireland as well as from abroad were aware of the Seven Woods of Coole. From a reality perspective, a large extent of the property was sold in early 1921, leaving a little domain of about 350 acres, wooded and romantic and beautiful, as Gregory put it. In 1927, the house, domain and wood was sold to the government, with the woods bringing in the highest profit. And Gregory at that point became merely a tenant at Coole. So that image, that photograph I'd shown you earlier, where she's sitting under the catalpa tree, was in the year in which she lived there as a tenant, no longer as an owner of that property. During the sale negotiations, she repeatedly lobbied for the Forestry Division to secure, quote, the maintenance and improvement of the woods, which she argued would give employment and be for the good and dignity of the country. And embedded there is, of course, as well, with the lasting existence of the woods, the family's legacy would be secured into the future as well. Yeats is imagining here in a poem entitled Coole Park 1929 that includes the lines here, traveller, scholar, poet, take your stand when all those rooms and passages are gone, when nettles wave upon a shapeless mound and saplings root among the broken stone. The house was demolished in 1941. What remains is the natural environment. And you can see there a photograph of where the house would have been. You can see the walls there. And everything else is gone. So to return then to the catalpa tree, which is an exotic tree in the Irish landscape and as such well known among past and present visitors to the woodland. When the tree had fallen on its side in a storm but remained thoroughly rooted in 2008, an outraged Irish citizen wrote to the Irish Times calling the subsequent act of chopping it down as, quote, an act of vandalism. The letter to the editor continues, the catalpa's presence at the entrance to the walled garden symbolised the unspoiled nature of a great domain where poets and dreamers have long found inspiration. Its absence is stark, unnecessary and irreversible. The unconventional beauty of Coole has been violated, as has the notion that ordinary people might be stakeholders in our natural heritage. There is a lesson in the sorry saga for every community in Ireland. Be ever on your guard against the sanitising agenda of officialdom. Truly, nothing is sacred. The use of sanitising is intriguing and quite a strong kind of phrase or term to use that points towards the entangled colonial legacies that exotic tree species that were planted in Ireland would entail. A new catalpa tree was planted soon after in memory of Lady Gregory, as you can see there. Since the house has been demolished and the Forestry Division took over, we now have Coole Park as part of the Coole Garyland Nature Reserve. It is managed by the National Parks and Wildlife Service. And in this nature reserve, we have both managed plantations and native woodland, which are situated side by side, as this map kind of shows. I wasn't able to get it better in to show you both the legend as well as the map. So here you have the kind of Coole domain with the house underneath the legend, and kind of branching out here, you have a section of native Irish woodlands that include ash, oak and yew. So you have those kind of estate plantations and native woodlands next to one another, which I find is quite a good opportunity for the project that they have to reinvigorate the interpretative centre at Coole Park to include cultural and natural heritage. So I feel that the different forms of knowledge we have about woods can be integrated there in this particular environment. And the arts and literature might play a pivotal role in this, and I would like to kind of just briefly point to the work of the Irish artist Katie Holton, who in 2018 developed a New York City tree alphabet, and the font is downloadable and encourages people to write poems, messages in trees, and each letter is drawn from the New York City Parks Department's native as well as non-native trees, while also including trees that will be planted in response to climate change. Over the course of the summer, Holton will develop a similar project in form of a Dublin tree alphabet, and no doubt she will turn, and this is me writing woods and Irish writing in trees, to give you an idea of what it might look like. And this summer, as I said, she's working on an Irish version for that, and no doubt she will turn to Joyce's Ulysses, which includes a tree wedding, in which he is kind of lampooning in this long outline of people who attended a particular wedding, that kind of landed elite's focus on planting exotic trees. So he's having a little bit of a go. I think a tree alphabet such as Katie Holton has developed might be a good way to include native as well as non-native trees, and thus embed natural as well as cultural histories into Ireland's story of its woodlands. Thank you.